Hello, welcome back to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way with Judeo-Christian values and real-world first-hand experience. You want to check out more, become part of the community, part of this tribe, this network of gunfighters, or you just want to support the podcast because you think that the content is worth it and should be out there, please consider going to goodshepherdtraining.com and supporting on Patreon. I'm going to plug in the bio if you want to skip it. Skip around 3 minutes and 45 seconds. First and foremost, I am a servant of God, preacher, a fisher of men. God is number one in my life, and everything that I do in this podcast is no different, and I don't apologize for that. A little bit about me in the background. I grew up, I guess what you would consider a heathen. Didn't grow up a Christian, but I grew up in the southeastern United States, what most would consider very poor. Hunting and fishing and shooting. Joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. After my combat tours in Iraq, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in law enforcement for several years in LAPD. I worked patrol assignments and more specialized assignments, where by God's grace, He got me through some nasty places in this world of war zones and some of the nastiest streets in the country. Not because I am better, because God chose to have mercy on me and had a purpose for me, and I'm thankful for that. After my time in law enforcement, I was a private contractor for federal government, for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify, doing private contracting work. I'm very much involved in guns and gunfighting. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I should say my primary MOS is in both branches of the military or infantry, as of one sort or another. Specialized infantry in the Marine Corps and an MOS that no longer exists. I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I won my first gold medal even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed by God with the talents He's given me to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. I've won most of my competitions in rifle and pistol, but I've also competed in archery and shotgun and even muzzleloader, knife throwing, hatchet throwing. I've competed in all that. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide. Like I said, I grew up hunting and fishing and shooting. I've done it to put meat on the table because I like to put food on the table with the talents God's given me. I don't apologize for that. I've done it as a professional hunter and guide. I've slain all manner of beast and guided for all manner of beast. Bear and wolf and elk and deer, mule deer, whitetail deer. I've slain ram and fallow deer and countless animals. And I don't apologize for that either. FBI certified, firearms instructor, NRA, and a bunch of other 3-letter government agency certifications. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. I've been blessed to be the commander of a tactical team, an SRT, special response team, in a large metropolitan area, where our primary job was to stop active shooters. But again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, called by God to share the good news, preacher, a fisher of men. With that, we will roll into the day's topic. Fighters, you probably read the title of this episode, the best point-blank cartridge. First off, I guess we should start by saying what point-blank is. Most people think of point-blank, if they're not familiar in the gun community in the proper vernacular, they think of it as extreme close range, but that's not the case. Point-blank means the distance, or the maximum distance at which I could point at a target and hit said target without any holdover, without any Kentucky windage, without anything like that. That could be 50 yards for a handgun and a headshot. That could be several hundred yards, as we'll talk about today. I'll also start with this caveat. I really love hunting. I really love putting meat on the table with my own two hands and having dominion over the beasts. I really think and believe that ought to be available to the common man. I grew up hunting to put meat on the table. I don't want to see hunting become a sport for the rich man only. I don't want to see it go to that. That being said, however much money you have, you should be able to hunt. And as long as it's ethical, you should be able to hunt however you want. If you're into the long range hunting, that's fine. But I think a lot of the common man that doesn't appeal to, the, high-end accurate rifle is probably the least expensive of the endeavor. You get so much into gear and so much into computers and laser rangefinders and all this other stuff. It's not the way that I like to hunt, and getting out to, 1,000-yard range, east of the Mississippi to practice your long-range hunting is probably outside the scope of your average blue-collar hunter. I think hunting should be for the common man to put food on the table. For that reason, I prefer, and for a lot of other reasons, I prefer still hunting and spot and stalk hunting. Again, if you want to hunt another way, that's fine, but that's not my jam. With that being said, there are some advantages to the point-blank cartridge, the point-blank rifle cartridge. With today's laser rangefinders, it's less about a flat trajectory and more about predictability. Look at the 6.5 Creedmoor, and I've had a whole episode on the 6.5 Creedmoor, and I really like it. I was reluctant to it at first, but I like it. It's a good hunting cartridge. But that round is a thing because it's predictable. That's what helps it win matches over the 308. It's not that it's more powerful. Look at it on paper. It's less powerful than a lot of other cartridges, but it's very predictable. It bucks the wind better. It cuts the wind better. It's very predictable in its trajectory. If you know the distance, meaning you have a precise computer laser rangefinder, it doesn't matter if the bullet drops 36 inches or 42 inches or anything like that, because you know exactly the distance and you have custom knobs on your scope that you click and dial and rein in and use this computer to hone your bullet where it goes. But if you're not hunting like that, if you are stalking antelopes through a dusty arroyo in the Southwest, or you are on your hands and knees cresting a grassy hill in central Idaho, and you see that fleeting white tail, or you're back east hunting a friend's farm, not in a stand, creeping around the edges of a cornfield, and you see in that agricultural dirt road that nice whitetail buck step out, and you only have a few seconds at most to get that good shot in the vitals. You don't have time for a laser rangefinder for that. That's when you want a point-blank cartridge. A cartridge that you point, either iron sights, which I love, or a good solid reticle. Do the fundamentals properly. As long as you apply those fundamentals and you keep that crosshair in the kill zone, that bullet will land somewhere in the kill zone. That's what I'm talking about with point-blank range. I think there's a cartridge that shines in this manner, that shines in this application. And a lot of cartridges are good at this, and a lot of cartridges are fine. This isn't even one of my favorites personally. I don't even own this cartridge, but I think if I was looking purely at the max effective point-blank range for a deer-sized game, I'm talking whitetail, I'm talking muleys, I'm talking pronghorn. I think the cartridge that does that and that outshines a lot of other cartridges is the 25-06. It's kind of the opposite of the new trend of these long BC heavy for caliber bullets. You're shooting relatively light bullets at high velocity. And inside, let's say 350, 400 yards, where BC is less of a factor And that flatter trajectory is more of a factor. Where if that situation where you're popping up in a dry arroyo in the southwest and you see a pronghorn bounding at 50 yards or trotting away at 275 yards, you can point, apply the fundamentals, and drop that animal to put meat on the table because you're a meat hunter. Or if you're in the woodlands east of the Mississippi hunting fields and you have that mostly close shots, again 50 yards, but then you have a couple of long logging roads where you can see a ways and that deer steps out. You don't have to worry about whether he's at 50 yards or 250 yards or 300 yards. You can point, and because it's a point blank cartridge that's very effective out to a long range, you can point and drop that animal if you apply the fundamentals. Do it without all the computers and laser rangefinders. You can do it with a good rifle and a good load and a good scope. Or like we talked about, even a good set of iron sights. And I think the 25-06 for deer size game is beautiful for that. Again, I don't even own one. My kind of go-to for this is a 243. But if I have to be honest, the 25-06 is a little bit better for this. 243 is a fine cartridge and I like it. You know that it's one of my favorites. But the 25-06 has a very flat trajectory inside a point blank range and it gives you a little bit heavier bullets. It is a beautiful, beautiful cartridge for this. For that point and click shooting, for lack of a better term. For still hunting or spot and stalk hunting out west. For those bean fields and logging roads back east. With a good constructed bullet, your 100, 110, 120 grain bullets in this caliber do great. And I'm not getting into dope and BZO and things like that. I've done whole episodes on that. But if your homework and your due diligence sighting in that rifle, and I'm not talking about the old sighted in for 100 yards, I'm talking about sighting it in for maximum point blank effectiveness. This is a fine cartridge, which will do almost anything that you can do without a computer. If that's not how you hunt, this cartridge is great for that. And again, I don't even own one, but I think it's a beautiful cartridge, and I think it's one that will do this without the Magnum drawbacks. And I think Magnums have a lot more drawbacks than benefits. It does this with a relatively modest powder charge and with relatively modest recoil. Meaning you can do this and shoot and practice shooting with a hasty sling in a kneeling position without breaking your shoulder and without breaking the bank. And it really kind of gives you Magnum performance. It gives you long point blank range and it gives you the ability to stop just about any deer size, medium size, mule deer, whitetail, pronghorn, even black bear with a good vitals shot. You have a little bit heavier construction. So whereas I usually limit myself in a deer hunt with a 243, unless it's really close, I'll limit myself to a strict broadside shot. Or if I really know the anatomy, maybe some other shots. But the 25-06, I'd feel comfortable taking a whitetail with a head-on shot or a three-quartering away shot. Pretty much everything except for a straightaway shot, where the animal is going straight away from me and all I see is tail. Pretty much any other shot, I'd be comfortable with a 25-06. And I'd be comfortable out to several hundred yards, again with that point-blank range. Now let's look at this. Let's look at some numbers. And again, I'm going to the Hornady reloading manual I have that is so old it does not list 300 blackout. And that's been around a while. But it's the book that I have. And I'm living off grid. I will likely travel some hour and a half to get even service to put this episode out. So this is the resource that I have. And keep in mind, the Hornady manuals, in my opinion, are a little conservative, meaning they don't really push the envelope for power. You can likely buy factory loads hotter than what I'm talking about here. So we're talking about the 25-06. The lightest I would go on deer would be 75 grain, and it wouldn't be my first choice. But if I had a good bullet construction, I might go that light. You're talking about a 75 grain bullet. It lists in here at 3,700 feet a second. common loads for your, just to put it in perspective, common loads for your 308 are 2,600, 2,700, maybe 2,800 feet a second. We're talking about 3,700 feet a second. Granted, it's a lighter bullet. But if you're talking point blank range, light, fast bullets are the name of the game. If you're talking coyotes, a 75 grain bullet would be beautiful. Now let's push up to some of my favorite grains for deer hunting, and that would be the 80-something grain to 90-something grain. You're talking about 3,400 feet a second with a 90 grain bullet. And again, that's probably pretty conservative. You could probably get factory loads hotter than that. But that's cooking, especially when a 308, your 6.5 Creedmoors are in your 2,600, 2,700 feet a second range. You're still talking 3,400. 100 grain bullet, which nobody, I don't think, would argue. I don't think anybody would argue that a 100 grain bullet at this velocity is not sufficient for taking any deer-sized game. You're talking 3,300 feet a second. And if you want to go heavy for this caliber, you're talking 120 grain bullet. 120 grain bullet at 3,000 feet a second. And that's giving you a sectional density of 0.260. That's a decent heavy for caliber bullet. Not a heavy bullet, a heavy for caliber bullet, if you want that high sectional density. And if you think you might be taking something other than a broadside shot. But those are some impressive numbers from a cartridge that came out. Well, let me flip back and see what it says. Now, I'm reading, to give credit where credit is due, from the Hornady Reloading Manual. Necking the 30-06 up and down has resulted in some very fine sporting cartridges. The 25-06 Remington is one of these. In 1969, 49 years after, A.O. Nieder introduced this Wildcat. So, 1969 was 49 years after this was introduced as a Wildcat. Remington adopted the round and made it commercially available in the Model 700 bolt action. The 25-06 has ample power for making long shots at deer and antelope, with some hunters claiming it is even adequate for elk. However, we feel its best use is on deer and antelope-sized game. As a varmint round, the 25-06 is outstanding. It is truly a multi-purpose caliber. A properly scoped 25-06 with Hornady varmint bullets is easily capable of 300 and 400 yard varminting. End of me reading from the Hornady Reloading Manual. So if you're into the super long range 1,000 yard driving up on a side-by-side and unloading your tripod and your laser rangefinder and your spotting scope and all that, this is not the cartridge for you. But if you're a blue-collar man that wants to be able to hunt a variety of environments, east or west, to be able to put those reticles on the target, on the kill zone, and apply the fundamentals well and pull the trigger and have deer-sized animals drop, the 25-06, I think, outshines pretty much any other cartridge for that. At least as far as efficiency goes without beating up your shoulder with Magnum punishment, let's call it, and Magnum prices. If you do want to step up to the Magnum, it's hard to argue with the 7mm Remington Magnum. But again, the 25-06 on deer-sized game will do it. Do it with less powder. It will do it more efficiently, and it will do it at a cost that won't break the bank. And if you listen to this and you're not a big-time hunter, don't think that you need all this stuff that you see that's cool looking on Instagram and all this other stuff to go out and shoot a deer. You don't. You need a rifle and an adequate cartridge, and you need to spend time in the woods. The guy that touts himself a hunter with all the whiz-bang stuff, if he doesn't spend time in the woods, he, by definition, can't hunt an animal. If you get out there with a rifle and a suitable cartridge and spend time in the woods and learn fieldcraft and learn to apply reading the wind and reading deer sign, Knowing the difference between a buck's tracks and a doe's tracks. Knowing, oh, it just snowed last night and there's fresh snow on the ground. I can get out there and stalk a big buck today. There's a good chance of that. By God's grace and His providence, I'll put meat in the freezer. You don't need all this expensive equipment. You can get out there with your pick of decent rifle. Don't take any bribes on this show. That's one of the things I hope to continue on this show, is that it's supported by patrons. I don't have a certain rifle or scope manufacturer giving me money to tell you how good their products are. Any decent scope, any decent rifle, you put the work in to sight in properly for a point blank shooting and get a good bullet construction, you can get out there and put meat on the table. You could get a 25-06 and a Savage Model 110, which is an affordable and accurate and capable rifle, with a Burris or Redfield or Leopold scope or any number of them that holds a 0. And whether you're hunting out of a canoe in Florida, if that's legal, I don't know. I like hunting from canoes when I'm in an area that allows me to do so, if it's legal. I've never lived in Florida. I'm just saying, the environment, you could do it. You could hunt out of a canoe with this somewhere on the southeast. You could stalk bean fields in Alabama. You could hunt the UP of Michigan with this gun. You could come out west in the Sonoran Desert or the Mojave and hunt pronghorn. You could go to Idaho and hunt big muleys with this rifle, needing a bunch of fancy computers and a quad and a duffel bag full of optics gear. You can be successful. Anyway, with that, I'm going to wrap up this episode of Gunfighter Life on the 25-06. I think in the world of all these new cartridges coming out, I think this is a great cartridge. And like I said, I don't even own it. I get nothing from telling you this other than I want you to get out there, men, and put meat on the table and meat in the freezer by the provision of God. And I hope that you do that. With that, I want to say thanks for listening to this episode of Gunfighter Life. If you want to be a part of the show, be a bigger part of the show, a contributing factor of the show, please consider going to goodshepherdtraining.com and supporting on Patreon. Talking about fieldcraft and tips and tricks. I'll give you a few today on the tactical tip of the day. You don't need all this talking about for the working man. You don't need all this expensive stuff to, hide your scent from deer. You don't need a bunch of scent killer and a bunch of scent lock clothing and all this other stuff. You need a muted color of clothing that's warm enough for the environment or cool enough for the environment, that's suitable for the environment. You don't even need camouflage. You wash it in rainwater or wash it in well water, not city water. City water smells like chlorine. Even I can smell the difference between city water and natural water. So I'm sure a deer can. But wash it in some kind of natural water, not city water, not yuppie water in a washing machine. Wash it by hand in a creek or with rainwater. Let it dry by hanging it, not putting in a dryer. Hang it outside in a natural environment. Then put it in a plastic bag where you keep its scent in and other scents out. And whatever environment you're in, you can probably find some cedar or some kind of pine tree. I can't think of anywhere that I know of, other than like Africa maybe, that doesn't have some kind of pine tree that smells. Take some of those smelly leaves or sage or whatever you want, crush it up and throw it in the bag and seal it. That's it. And learn how to read the wind. Have the wind blowing in your face towards you and away from the animal you're trying to hunt. A tactical tip. Another one is, and I used to do this as a kid, when you take your first or second deer, whatever the last deer or the next deer you take is, if you don't already do this, cut out the scent glands. They're on the back of the leg. Run your nose up and down that leg. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you'll find the scent gland, especially on a male deer. You'll find that scent gland. You cut that off and you poke a little hole in it. Yeah, it's going to stink. You're probably going to stink anyway if you're gutting deer. cut a hole in it and lace it into your hunting boots so that the laces go through it and it just hangs on your hunting boot. A poor man's way of getting some pretty good deer scent. One of your best deer to do this on, if deer can tell the difference, is like a young buck. So those are your tactical tips of the day. You can be a pro at managing scent and not have to spend a bunch of money. And I want hunting to be for the common man to put food on the table. Don't like the idea of going out to hunt a deer costing more than buying filet mignon pound for pound when it's all said and done. I don't believe that's the way it should be. It's public land. Those are our deer. I believe those are the people's deer, and you ought to be able to hunt them without being a rich man. At least a rich man financially anyway. I think they ought to be open to the common middle-class American that wants to put meat on the table. The tactical verse of the day would apply well in a deer field, hunting deer, or at any other point in life. You'll find it in Psalm 37. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and feed on his faithfulness. Delight yourself also in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. He shall bring forth your righteousness as the light, and your justice as the noonday. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Patience is a great skill in the Christian walk and in hunting. And whatever you do, trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and feed on his faithfulness. Delight yourself also in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart. That's a promise from God. It reminds me of another verse. What reminds me of many verses. But let me just say, trust in God. Focus on God, and he'll take care of you. That's a promise from God. He promises that in many different ways in many different verses in the Bible. Matthew 6. Therefore do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For after all these things the Gentiles seek. For your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But seek first the kingdom of God, and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own things. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. Thanks for listening, men, and have a blessed day.